The Long Haul Podcast, America's Irish voice. Interviews with inspiring immigrants, renowned Irish personalities, and discussions on all things Irish America. Presented by Michael Dorgan. So welcome along to this special edition of the Long Haul Podcast, where we're going to preview Jason Quigley's world title fight Friday night in New Hampshire against Demetrius Andrade for the WBO World Middleweight title. We'll also look into the possibility of MICK fighting a double header on Paddy's Day next year with Katie Taylor. That will be some historic. That will be a historic event for sure. And I've on the line with me now is Gavan Casey, who I consider one of the best Irish boxing journalists currently active at the moment. Gavan has reported on several boxing fights here in the US before the pandemic struck. Myself and Gavan were at a number of Katie Taylor fights. And so Gavan, give Gavan a follow on @Gavan Casey. He writes for the 42.ie, one of the top sporting websites in Ireland. So Gavan, thanks very much for coming on the Long Haul Podcast.
Nice one, Mike. I don't know how you got through that with a straight face, but I'll take it.
For the record, also, Gavan is a fellow Cork man, and but he's from maybe a more posher side of Cork than myself.
There's a couple of kilometres in it.
But anyway, we've got Gavan on. He's one of the top journalists, as I said. So we're going to drive straight into it here now. So, Gav, Jason Quigley's 30 years of age, 20 fights to his name, 20 professional fights. It's going to be obviously the biggest fight of his career, fighting for a title. It's going to be now or never for him, basically. But you're just going to touch on maybe his record to date and maybe what kind of a style of a fighter he is, and his amateur record going back the last maybe 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I suppose he would have blown into mainstream consciousness around 2013, Mike. And at the time, he became the number one ranked amateur middleweight in the world. He won silver at the World Championships. He was a European champion. And at that stage, it was kind of bold from the blue success in a sense, because it's rarely you see a guy ascend to like elite global level so quickly, or as quickly as he did it. And then he kind of rose to notoriety, or at least he turned a few heads in the States, and off the back of those medals, then he turned professional with Golden Boy Boxing. He signed with Golden Boy Promotions, who were founded by Oscar De La Hoya, who for a spell in his own professional career was an incredibly talented middleweight in his own right. And he had a little bit of everything. All action fighter, had a little bit of pop in either hand, decent defensively. He kind of just was a very rounded boxer, and a lot was expected of him then in his professional career as he made that transition to a fair bit of hype back home. It's not too often that we have somebody like De La Hoya earmarking or pinpointing an Irish fighter and going, I'm going to bring this guy to the top. And from that point onwards, it's been a little bit more rocky. And if his ascent as an amateur was almost overnight, or it felt overnight, this process of him getting towards a world title opportunity has felt almost protracted. There have been a lot of road bumps along the way, including a career defeat, his sole career defeat a couple of years ago to Tureano Johnson. And there have been large, probably spells of his professional career in which he has flattered to deceive, just performatively or in terms of what he's been able to produce in the ring. For a long time, there would have been question marks over his gas tank and stamina, and it was never a case of, he was cutting corners in training, or he didn't have the aerobic capacity to fight for 10, 12 rounds. It was always, as he later explained, a mental thing. And that he seems to have addressed with Andy Lee, his trainer, in his corner in recent months, or over the last 12 or 18 months. His last performance, which opened the door to this world title opportunity, was a very good victory against Shane Mosley Jr. in a close fight. But Quigley actually, conversely to what we'd seen of him in nearly every fight prior, grew into it as the fight went on. And where you usually start to question, does Quigley have the legs here? He actually exploded into life and seemed to enjoy it and took over the fight really down the stretch. So hopefully ahead of this fight against Demetrius Andrade, where he's going to need more than we've ever seen of him before, that issue has been addressed. And as you say, or as you said at the top of the show, it does feel like a bit of a case of now or never for him. 30 years of age, yeah, but it's more so the fact that if you don't put up a good showing here, based on what you've produced in the past, there probably isn't going to be a demand for you to even re-enter the fringe contention. you've got to produce something here on the zone in a main event in front of 10,000 people against an American champion that makes people want to see you again, or would make a promoter view you as a viable contender or challenger to one of their champions again. So, yeah, now or never in a lot of ways, even if he wasn't to win and if he was to somehow just perform to his own capability and put on a good show or do himself justice, at least I would think he'd remain in the picture. If he was to get completely outclassed or blown out of it, which isn't inconceivable, Andrade is a very good fighter, then yeah, it's probably a case of never then, Mike, you know. And I think he's very much cognizant of that himself.
Yeah, he's a very likable character, isn't he? He's very softly spoken for a boxer. You know, there's no bravado about him. I'm quite taken to him. He's a very affable character. You know, there's never really any trash talking with him. Against Mosley Jr., he called out Andrade afterwards. It was almost like asking him rather than, you know, the old good WWE style, but he got the fight in the end. But I listened to his interviews, very softly spoken, seems to be a well-balanced individual, and seems to know what he's doing. He's got a good backroom team there. As you said, Andy Lee is in his corner, of course, a previous WBO middleweight champion. I'm not sure if Andy Lee will travel again, as I don't think he travelled against the Mosley Jr. I think Wayne McCullough was in his corner. And not sure if Wayne is going to be there again Friday, but of course, and Tyson, he's been in camp with Tyson Fury. So he's got everything around him seems to be top level. Everything around him has been professional, top notch. I think he's fully prepared. He said he's better off fighting for the title now than maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So maybe this will be the chance that we'll see him perform to the best of his ability. Yeah,
it's well put, and I think that it's actually, from his point of view, not only in terms of the professional setup he has around him, which, as you say, is almost second to none, at least in terms of training staff. I think Andy will make the trip. I haven't had it confirmed, but just because the restrictions over in America have been eased since, was it the 8th of November or something along those lines, he shouldn't need the national interest exemption that he was unable to get for Fury's fight and for Quigley's fight before that. You mentioned Wayne McCullough stepped in. Jason was telling me a few weeks ago at a press event in Dublin that he'd love for McCullough to come up again and just help out if he's around, but I'm not exactly sure if that's going to come to fruition. Yeah, as you say, his professional setup around him is almost second to none, at least in terms of his trainer. And Andy Lee, he's co-trainer to the heavyweight champion of the world and has made a marked difference to what we've seen of Tyson Fury in his last couple of fights. I think Andy will be able to travel. I haven't had that confirmed, but because the restrictions in America have eased since, what was it, like the 8th of November, I don't think Andy requires that national interest exemption to get over there this time around. That precluded him from going to Fury Wilder 3, and as you mentioned, Quigley's last fight with Mosley Jr. as well, where Wayne McCullough stepped in. I think Jason was telling me that he'd love for Wayne to come up again anyway, even if Andy is there, and just help out and be around him. They obviously got on very well last time. They used to live only down the road from each other where Jason was based in the States. But even outside of that sort of professional paradigm, if you like, we're of a similar age, Jason and I, and I've been interviewing him for probably 5 or 6 years or however long I've been doing this. So it's always been interesting kind of sharing notes, if you like, and seeing where each other is in life, generally speaking. And again, that's probably been a bit of a protracted process for him to get to where he is now, just mentally, psychologically. He's had familial issues in the past. He did this brilliant piece with Vincent Hogan earlier this week, in which he detailed the fallout or the separation he endured with his father. There have been other things, you know, his girlfriend or his partner, April, 2 of them are engaged now, actually. She's his fiance, but I think for a while they weren't together. Just little things like that, where he was living in the States with nobody over there with him. I remember him telling me about 3 or 4 years ago while he was there, like, this is all great, like, but if you've nobody to share it with, like, what good is it, you know? And he was living a very kind of solitary existence, and I don't think he fancied it in the end. I mean, he clearly didn't, and he relocated to Sheffield and eventually back to Donegal, where he just seems more happy. He just seems more content and sure of himself. So, as he was saying, you kind of quoted him a minute ago about this suits him better now than it would have a couple of years ago. I think it's more to do with where he finds himself in life generally. When I was speaking to him just before he flew off, he gave this quote, which in normal circumstances you'd actually find alarming, where he was talking about like if I don't win, like, so what, you know? And usually you hear a fighter say that. Well, actually, usually you don't hear a fighter say that at all. But when you do, on the off chance, you're like, Jesus Christ, is his head gone? Does he, you know? But really with Jason, it was more so, he's as you say, he's a very kind of articulate guy. He's very introspective. He has an eye on the bigger picture without necessarily losing focus on this fight or what it means. It's more so he has perspective. He has perspective that a lot of fighters wouldn't have. It's a trade or a profession in which you have to be so singular and tunnel visioned or single-minded. And I think he is single-minded when he needs to be and will be on Friday night or has been towards Friday night. But ultimately after that, win, lose or draw, he knows he has a decent life to go back to, which is a nice little position to be in and a position that would be the envy of most fighters.
Yeah, he was in LA, I think, for a time, Gavan, wasn't he? And I think he broke his hand at one stage, and I think it was a tough year for him there when he wasn't doing anything with a broken hand. But let's move on to, we'll preview the actual fight now in a moment. I just want to touch on Demetrius Andrade. He's slightly older than Jason. He's 33. He's 30-0 professional record. While Jason was calling out Andrade was calling out Canelo a couple of months ago. So Canelo is after the big fish, the top 4 or 5 in the division, and he can't seem to get that fight. And Jason has touched on it in his interviews. He said, it was an interview I saw yesterday, he said that Andrade is a low risk, high risk, low reward fighter. And can you speak to that and why some of the top tier guys, maybe the top 4 or 5 tier guys, are trying to avoid him? And of course, he appeared at Canelo's post-match interview, I think, a couple of months ago, and made a show just to try and get the fight, but it hasn't materialized. But why is he such a difficult fighter to fight against? I know he's southpaw, of course.
Yeah, I actually think it's less to do with his style or less to do with his ability, to be honest, Mike, and more to do with his marketability or lack thereof. Yeah. I think if you were to put call a spade, he's kind of in the who needs them club, even though he is a champion. You can say, well, why not take him on and look to rip the belt off him? But he is fairly awkward, and with him, generally speaking, I think in terms of the kind of American boxing context, is he worth fighting for the sake of like a potential defeat on your own record for little gain other than the title? Like, again, you can make the case that, yeah, of course it would be, but he's just not the most compelling of characters. And that's, listen, that sounds like a real character assassination, but like not everybody can be the most charismatic fella in the room the way Canelo is becoming, you know. Yeah. And I think it's more a case of them, as in the other top guys that you mentioned, around 160 pounds, just not really been bothered with them. I think a lot of them would beat him, to be totally honest. And I think especially at 33, as you mentioned, at a stage in his career where it has been rumored a couple of times that maybe he's struggling to make 160 pounds to begin with. We'll obviously find that out on Thursday. I'd say he's probably not even the fighter that he was about 2 years ago, if I'm totally honest. I've seen him in the flesh, and he was, I wouldn't say he was exciting, but he had a little bit of pop, and he fought well for 12 rounds. I think in his last fight against Liam Williams, there were probably chinks in his armor that were exposed a little bit, or at least it was proven that he is hittable, and that really he probably doesn't have kind of game-changing power. He tends to drop guys without finishing them quite often, or at least that's happened 3 or 4 times in his career as a world champion. So you know, when we were talking a minute ago about how this opportunity is coming at the right time for Jason Quigley, I think that applies to Quigley's life, but also potentially within the context of Andrade's own career and his age and just maybe his body or his anatomy. You know, like the fact that maybe this might be, we don't know, but maybe this might be one fight too far at 160, and maybe he fades down the stretch. Like, these little things can just happen out of nowhere, and suddenly a champion no longer resembles a champion, you know? And it's not something that Quigley is gambling on. He's just going in there thinking, I'm going to give him hell for 12 rounds, and if I'm better than him, I'm better than him. If I'm not, I'm not. But it's something that I think he needs if he's going to win the fight. That's the reality of it, because I think Andrade now is still faster than Jason Quigley. He might have more power than Jason Quigley. That's probably, you know, 6 of one, half dozen the other there in power stakes. Like, he's probably a better boxer as a professional. He was a very good amateur in his own right. He was a world amateur champion. So Quigley needs something, some kind of act of God or some sort of conditional thing to work in his favor, probably a couple of those things to work in his favor in order to narrow the gap on paper between them. Like, if you ask me, does Quigley have the power to stop Demetrius Andrade? Like, I don't think so. Does Quigley have the boxing ability to outbox him over 12 rounds and actually get a decision in America? Like, I doubt it. But again, if Andrade is fading, and there have been suggestions that he is, and not just ahead of this fight, I'm not talking about Irish people suggesting this, but people in America, maybe the stars just align, and I think that's what we're reliant on as Irish fans this time around. It is a bit of a Hail Mary job, but it's been done.
So just to put the fight in perspective or in context for people, Andrade is 10-1 on with the bookies, and Quigley is a massive outsider at 7-1. So it is an uphill battle. It's a kind of a David versus Goliath type of thing. But Gavan, we've been there before. It was about 2 years ago. We sat in Madison Square Garden when Anthony Joshua was defeated by Andy Ruiz, and we were up the press box writing our report on Katie Taylor. And next thing, into the third round, and we saw one of the biggest upsets in boxing history. So there is a chance there for Jason to cause the upset. And you're saying that his best approach is maybe to go the distance with him and probably maybe finish him off in the last couple of rounds if possible. Would that be his approach going into this fight?
Yeah, that'd be the dream. I think, like to refer to what you're saying there about Ruiz Joshua, even more recently than that, and I don't think either of us were there, but last weekend in Sheffield, you saw on a matchroom card, which this is on Friday night, Kiko Martinez shocking the world with a victory over Kid Galahad a few weeks prior, again on a matchroom card. Sandor Martin, this Spaniard who the Americans on DAZN had paid absolutely no credence to, came over and beat a four-weight world champion in Mikey Garcia, probably the upset of the year, or one of them. And actually Eddie Hearn, who promotes Andrade, has been taking upset defeats all year. Like, there's been Josh Warrington before that and a few more, James Tennyson, our own, getting shot by Giovanni Strafone. So upsets happen. In terms of how Quigley approaches it, I think he needs a very distinct plan, and I actually don't know what that plan is. And that's kind of a problem in my own mind. Now, I'm not some sort of tactical mastermind the way an Andy Lee is, and Andy obviously learned as well, by the way, from a very good tactician in Adam Booth, and potentially a great one in Emmanuel Stewart, excuse me. And I think he needs I think he needs a distinct plan wherein he actually takes Andrade out of his comfort zone, and he said that on the record, like, he needs to do that. But that's easier said than done. Like, it's a nice soundbite, but I actually personally don't know how you do it, because ultimately, you can rip him to the body, or you can try to be elusive for 6 rounds and chopping wood, and eventually the treetop is over towards the end of the fight, whatever. But he's going to be there, and he's going to be hitting you back pretty hard. He's fairly slick fighter in his own right, probably more slick than Quigley is. So that's where obviously Andy Lee comes in. He definitely had got the Fury Wilder fights right, and that was with Sugar Hill Stewart, who again is a disciple and nephew of Manny Stewart. But I'm trying to figure out where they go with this one, where it's not just a case of Quigley trying his best and trying to do what he's good at, which is power punching and punching in 2s and 3s and just being a tough bastard for all intents and purposes. That's not going to be enough. And I'd love to know what they're thinking in terms of how they actually add a string or two to Quigley's bow and detract from Andrade. But I actually don't have the answer as to how to do that.
And of course, hopefully, maybe he's got his eye on Canelo. Maybe he's not. Maybe he's taking his eye off the ball for Friday night, and Jason can capitalize. There's no reason why he can't.
Absolutely, yeah. That's another little intangible potentially, because from his point of view, he's been fighting guys for the last 2-3 years who don't belong in the ring with him. And you know for sure that's the way he's thinking about Quigley as well. If he just looks at Quigley's CV, I'm sure he's seen him fight live before and probably struggled with guys who he himself believes he would have had out of there in a couple of rounds. So absolutely, it's always possible somebody takes their eye off the ball. And again, it's one of those little conditional things that you hope amalgamates or conspires against Andrade on the night.
Yeah, and Jason has been he landed in Boston, first of all, in Massachusetts over the weekend, and was doing a tour for the last couple of days, trying to rally the Irish support there in Boston. And then he's after making his way up north to Manchester, New Hampshire. Of course, the fight is on the SNHU Arena from 8, but that'll be the early hours it'll be on. But we're hoping that there'll be big Irish turnout. But for Irish people who wouldn't be familiar with the East Coast here, New York, you'd have a big boxing following, a big Irish population here. It's very awkward to get to if you're going to be going up from New York on a Friday. It means taking probably the day off work. So maybe a large cohort of the Irish fans will be coming from Boston, but hopefully he'll have a big following there coming up from Boston Friday night.
Yeah, big time. I think what is it like? The whole area, the whhole region of 6 states is called New England, really, isn't it? And you've got a huge Irish population in most of those areas. But equally, I know that Chris McNulty, who's his media guy or his publicist, was telling us a few weeks ago that there was a bar in New York. I can't remember the name of it now, or maybe he didn't give us the name, but they had basically advertised sending a bus up to Manchester for the fight, and within an hour, 60 seats were gone. They had to get another one. So I actually think there will be a bit of a contingent coming from New York, but it's probably people who would have organised it a few weeks ago and taken that day off, actually, as you mentioned there. Quigley's confident that he'll have more Irish people in there than will be the case for Andrade. Now, Andrade's from Providence in Rhode Island, which is a neighbouring state again. So I'm sure he'll have plenty of his own fans there. But you know the Irish, we like a cause, and we especially like an underdog story, or even, again, a bit of a Hail Mary shot. So I reckon it could be 50-50, 60-40 in Quigley's favour. It's going to be raucous either way. And hopefully listeners to this podcast and anybody who you know around New York makes a trip if they can, you know.
Get up to New Hampshire, get up and follow Jason Quigley. Hopefully it'll be a historic night for Irish boxing, and he can get the job done.
Why, Santi, my dear Annie.
And that's all for this week. Let us know what you think by leaving us a comment on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at The Long Haul Podcast, or visit our website, thelonghaulpodcast.com. Please like, rate and subscribe to the podcast. This will ensure that we can get even more episodes to you more often. You can check out all of our previous podcasts on thelonghaulpodcast.com, where we also have post-match interviews and reports on all of this year's New York GA finals. And of course, a great story on the near 150 Irish runners who completed the New York City Marathon last Sunday. You can also read about other Irish American sports stories and other news items on this site. Slán go fóill, and thanks for listening.
Oh, you New York girls, can you dance the polka? And when we got inside the house, the drinks were passed around. The liquor was so awful strong, my head went round.